Well, we are running the Twitter poll on whether or not banks should have any involvement in the land expropriation debate. You can still participate via our hashtag. You can participate via our handle at SABC News Online. Now, Bulelwa Mabasa is an attorney at Werkmans Attorneys and is a land claims expert who's chiefly concerned that the current debate on expropriation is happening over shifting political sands, and that until now the details are not clear. We have no certainty of if or even how it will in fact be executed. She is now joining us here in studio. Bulelwa, good evening to you. I mean, have I summed up your concerns correctly?
I think quite correctly so. I think the debate so far has been quite rhetorical. It's been, I think quite rightly, an emotional subject. But I think it's time that we grappled with the actual issues around what is the policy on land and what has actually happened over the last 24 years and where we need to go.
There are those who would caution you, though, and say, look, let's not put the horse before the cart. There's still going to be a process that's going to be underway. There's going to be extensive public participation. We don't quite know what it will look like. So let's hold off a bit. Yeah.
Look, I think it's quite an important opportunity to actually look at what the policy has looked like for the last 24 years, where the successes and failures have been, and where opportunity lies for us to correct some of the challenges that have been experienced in the last 24 years. So I think it is an opportune time to actually deal with the detail. And
yeah, I mean, that's exactly right, because anytime political parties seem to agree on something, it's a moment to raise your eyebrows, because, as you say, the devil is in the details.
Yep.
So if we then think about what's happened in the last 24 years around the willing seller, willing buyer arrangement, for example, how much has that actually hampered the process?
I think it's hampered the process quite significantly. If we look into the scheme of the Constitution, Section 25 is a section in the Constitution that deals with land reform. Section 25 provides guidelines that must help the state in acquiring land for purposes of land reform. The willing buyer, willing seller was not one of those factors. Market value is only one of about 4 or 5 factors to be taken into account. And I think what we've seen in the last 24 years was almost like a blanket lazy thinking, and actually just implementing a policy that was not blessed by the Constitution, if you like, where the government simply asked landowners what they wanted to pay for land when they should have actually looked at other factors.
Because it provides, for example, for just and equitable, what's the phrasing? Just and equitable compensation.
Absolutely.
And in some cases, that may well mean no monies.
Yeah, absolutely, because what the exercise entails looking at the merits of each case, looking at the history of the acquisition of that property. In other words, if historically the property can be shown to have been a property that was donated by the state, and where
no improvements have been made,
that would that would be one example where compensation would not need to be paid in those circumstances.
I suppose the concern for a number of people who are watching all of this is this about the politics and the moment where we find ourselves in the country politically? Because we've had jurists, as highly regarded as Albie Sachs and Timbekile and Ngugaitopi, who are saying that, listen, Section 25 already provides for what needs to be done.
Look, we are facing electioneering, and if you look at the history of whenever there's been an upsurge about land debates, it incidentally, or rather not so incidentally, it always occurs just when, just before electioneering happens. We've also got the upsurge of the influence of the EFF, which cannot be avoided. The EFF have quite openly advocated for land expropriation without compensation as one of their biggest policy, policy objectives. And so, yes, there is a matter of politics, but I think over and above the issue of politics, we need to educate the public about what has in fact happened in the last 24 years. One example of that is that the land Rural Development and Land Reform, which is the governmental department that has been tasked with achieving land reform has only but received less than 1% of the national budget. And in fact, the budget, the resource allocation into this department has been woeful. And the trajectory of the allocation has since dwindled from 2008 to date. So we can almost trace the mechanics of an inefficient state, or rather a state that is in the hands of foreign elements, such as the state capture issue. It can no longer be the elephant in the room. You can almost trace that when the beginnings of state capture happened, that's when you saw the land question
rising
also
again.
Yeah.
But there have been other failures. I mean, because one of the things you must consider is that even if land is given, say, to a particular community, that's only the beginning. Commercial farming, for example, is a capital intensive exercise. It's a skills-driven exercise, and in many cases where even restitution has happened, things don't go forward.
Absolutely. And this is where we need to start thinking about whether or not we've got legislative lacunas that need to be filled. There isn't anything currently in the legislation that obligates the states or anyone else to ensure that once restitution happens, that the post-settlement support is there. So there's nothing that says the state must give, support in terms of skills, business plans, and so on.
So are the politicians then preying on people's real fears, real frustrations, when in fact some are even arguing that the real issue is around inequality and poverty, and that we can't really be reverting to an agrarian economy again?
That's an important issue, because if you look at urban migration as an issue, and if you look at how many, we're faced with the huge issues around youth unemployment and in urban spaces, then the issue becomes, if you're going to advocate for an agrarian economy, what steps have you taken to stimulate interest and to also stimulate economic and support in other areas to make sure that it is a successful plan?
Notwithstanding the numbers you need in Parliament to amend the Constitution to make it whatever it is, what it's going to look like in the future. Bulelwa, I think, as you say, the devil is in the details. We're still going to find out what those may be in the unfolding months and weeks to come. That was the Director of Werksmans Attorneys, Bulelwa Mabasa.